Have you ever wondered why people often act in ways that seem contradictory, even irrational? On the surface, human behavior can appear chaotic, driven by impulses, emotions, or chance. Yet, if we step back and observe carefully, patterns begin to emerge. These patterns are subtle, woven into the very fabric of our interactions, dictated by desires, fears, and self-interest. Most people ignore them, assuming behavior is unpredictable, but the truth is far simpler and far more revealing than we typically imagine. Understanding this hidden structure is the first step toward navigating life with clarity. Humans are motivated by core impulses that rarely change: the need for security, the pursuit of advantage, the fear of loss, and the craving for recognition. These impulses govern our decisions, often in ways we barely notice. Someone who seems generous may be driven by a desire for admiration. A person who appears hostile may be acting from fear rather than malice. Even our closest relationships are shaped by these invisible currents. By learning to recognize them, we gain a lens that allows us to see beyond the surface, to anticipate actions before they happen. Consider a crowded room, filled with strangers and acquaintances. On the surface, it is a sea of randomness, laughter, conversation, movement. But observe closely, and you will notice repeated behaviors. People cluster with those who elevate their status or reinforce their self-image. Some speak loudly to assert dominance, while others remain silent to gather information. Each choice, each gesture, carries meaning. Those who can interpret these signals gain an advantage because they understand the underlying motivations driving each interaction. The patterns are subtle, but they are always there, waiting for the discerning eye. The challenge is that most people never pause to reflect. They respond impulsively, assuming others are as unpredictable as they feel themselves to be. This assumption blinds them to opportunity. By contrast, those who see the hidden patterns develop a form of social foresight. They anticipate behavior, understand unspoken motives, and position themselves advantageously. This is not manipulation for its own sake. It is clarity, seeing the world as it truly operates, rather than through the fog of assumption and wishful thinking. As we begin this journey, it is essential to hold two ideas simultaneously: that people are complex, and that their complexity follows discernible patterns. This balance allows reflection without cynicism, strategy without cruelty. Understanding these hidden patterns is not a moral exercise, but a practical one. It prepares you to move through life with a steadier hand, recognizing opportunities where others see only chaos. Once this lens is adopted, the social world becomes less bewildering, more navigable, and infinitely more interesting. Human behavior is rarely guided by abstract notions of morality or by logical reasoning alone. In truth, most actions are driven by self-interest, the desire to protect oneself, and the fear of loss or harm. People make choices not because they are right or fair, but because they serve immediate needs or long-term advantages. This is not a cynical observation. It is a practical reality that underlies almost every interaction. Understanding this principle allows us to read situations with clarity and to see beyond the polished words and gestures that people present. Consider a moment of conflict between two colleagues. To an outsider, the disagreement might appear as a clash of personalities or a simple difference of opinion. Yet, beneath the surface, each individual is motivated by fear of being diminished, by a need to assert competence, or by the desire to secure influence. Actions that seem irrational or overly aggressive are often rational when viewed through the lens of self-preservation. Recognizing this shifts our perception from judgment to insight, revealing the true architecture of human motives. Fear plays a surprisingly powerful role. It shapes decisions in subtle ways, often without conscious awareness. People avoid risks, hesitate to speak, or overcompensate in displays of confidence, all to mitigate the consequences of potential loss. Similarly, self-interest guides choices that appear generous or selfless on the surface. A compliment, a favor, or an act of kindness may carry an unspoken expectation, reciprocity, acknowledgement, or protection of reputation. Empathy alone is insufficient if it ignores these hidden drivers. True understanding requires seeing not only what people say, but also what they stand to gain or lose. Machiavelli emphasized this point centuries ago. Rulers and leaders who ignored human self-interest and fear were doomed to fail. Those who observed, anticipated, and leveraged these natural drives found the path to power and stability. The lesson extends beyond politics. It applies to everyday life, friendships, business, and personal relationships. Recognizing hidden motives is like finding a map in a maze. The twists and turns of human behavior suddenly make sense, revealing predictable patterns and revealing opportunities that would otherwise remain invisible. For the viewer, this realization brings both caution and empowerment. Caution, because the world is more calculated than it appears. Empowerment, because understanding these truths equips one to navigate interaction strategically, responding thoughtfully rather than reacting blindly. By identifying the forces of self-interest and fear, we gain a form of social intelligence that is rare but profoundly effective. Each person becomes legible, not mysterious, and each situation becomes an opportunity for clarity and foresight. By embracing this perspective, viewers begin to see beyond surface appearances. They recognize that people rarely act in ways we expect. They act in ways they need to. And once we understand these needs, the choices, conflicts, and alliances around us become not random or confusing, but comprehensible and actionable. This knowledge transforms passive observation into active insight, setting the stage for deeper mastery of human nature in the sections to come. In every interaction, what we see is rarely the full story. People present versions of themselves, carefully curated to influence perception. Their gestures, words, and expressions act as signals, designed to elicit specific responses from others. Rarely do they reveal their true intentions openly. This is not deception in the sinister sense, but a natural consequence of social life. Humans are aware that perception shapes reality, and they act accordingly. Understanding this distinction between appearance and truth is crucial for anyone seeking to navigate human behavior strategically. Consider a casual conversation. A smile may indicate warmth, or it may be a polite shield masking doubt or discomfort. Compliments may convey admiration, or they may serve as a subtle claim to influence or favor. Even silence communicates something: attention, judgment, or a calculated pause to gauge reaction. Every gesture carries layered meaning, and the perceptive observer can interpret these layers to anticipate outcomes. By learning to read the signals rather than taking appearances at face value, one gains an intellectual advantage in predicting behavior and shaping interactions. Perception is not static. People continuously adjust how they present themselves based on context and the reactions they receive. A coworker may appear confident in one meeting but hesitant in another, not because their ability has changed, but because the dynamics and stakes differ. Similarly, friends or acquaintances may act generous, humble, or deferential depending on who is watching. Recognizing this fluidity allows the viewer to interpret behaviors within context, rather than making assumptions based on isolated incidents. Each situation becomes a puzzle, with clues hidden in the subtle shifts of demeanor and tone. Mastering perception requires patience and attention. It is a practice of careful observation, noticing small inconsistencies between words, actions, and timing. The truth is rarely what people show openly. It often resides in what they fear revealing: the slight hesitation, the carefully measured smile, or the unspoken priorities behind their choices. By attuning to these subtleties, the audience begins to distinguish genuine intentions from performative behaviors, transforming ordinary social encounters into exercises in insight and understanding. This understanding carries profound strategic value. When you see the signals beneath the surface, you can influence outcomes without overt force. You can anticipate reactions, prepare responses, and create conditions where others act predictably, even unknowingly. Mastering perception is, in effect, mastering a form of power that is subtle but extraordinarily effective. It allows one to navigate complex social landscapes with calm, clarity, and foresight, moving gracefully through interactions that might otherwise feel unpredictable or confounding. For the viewer, this section illuminates the hidden architecture of human behavior. By understanding that appearances are often signals rather than truths, they gain both confidence and insight. The world becomes more legible, more navigable, and more strategically approachable. This perspective lays the groundwork for further exploration, where the one truth about human nature will reveal even deeper opportunities to anticipate, influence, and understand the people around them. There is a single principle that quietly governs human behavior, a truth so fundamental that once it is understood, it changes the way we see everyone around us. That truth is simple yet profound. People act primarily to serve themselves. Every decision, every gesture, every interaction is filtered through this lens, whether consciously or unconsciously. Understanding this principle is not an exercise in cynicism. It is a tool for clarity, a framework for interpreting behavior that allows one to anticipate, respond, and navigate with insight. Think of a moment when someone appeared generous, supportive, or cooperative. On the surface, it may have seemed motivated by kindness. But dig deeper, and often there is an underlying self-interest, a desire for approval, the need to strengthen a connection, or a calculated move to avoid conflict. Conversely, moments of conflict or aggression also follow this rule. People lash out or withdraw not randomly, but in ways that protect, advance, or assert their own interests. Recognizing this pattern allows us to predict actions with surprising accuracy, replacing guesswork with understanding. This truth rewires perception. The audience begins to see interactions not as chaotic or unfair, but as structured and predictable once the underlying self-interest is considered. It explains why promises are broken, why intentions shift, and why people behave inconsistently. When we grasp this principle, the social world becomes a series of choices influenced by need, desire, and fear. Nothing is arbitrary. Everything has a rationale anchored in self-preservation and personal gain. The observer who internalizes this sees opportunities where others see confusion. Consider historical examples of leadership. Great strategists, thinkers, and rulers did not operate under the illusion that people act morally or logically. They understood self-interest and fear, and they used this knowledge to guide decisions, influence behavior, and secure stability. They knew when to appeal to desire, when to evoke fear, and when to allow autonomy, always mindful of the underlying motivations that drive human behavior. Their mastery was not in controlling others directly, but in understanding the rules that govern action. For the viewer, this realization is both liberating and urgent. Liberating, because it allows clarity in social situations that once felt unpredictable. Urgent, because failing to recognize this truth leaves one exposed to manipulation, misjudgment, or missed opportunity. Internalizing it equips the audience with a form of social foresight, enabling strategic decisions in personal, professional, and interpersonal domains. Each interaction becomes a puzzle with rules, patterns, and possible outcomes, all discernible once the lens of self-interest is applied. By embracing this truth, viewers begin to think differently about trust, influence, and expectation. They learn to observe, interpret, and act in ways aligned with reality rather than assumption. This section lays the foundation for practical application, guiding the audience toward a strategic mindset where understanding motives precedes judgment. The world no longer feels random. It feels navigable, intelligible, and full of opportunity for those who see clearly. To truly understand the principle that humans act primarily out of self-interest, it helps to look at examples where this truth is evident. History is filled with leaders, thinkers, and strategists who understood and applied this insight. Take Niccolo Machiavelli himself. He observed that rulers who ignored the self-interest of their subjects and allies often failed, while those who accounted for desire, fear, and ambition maintained control and influence. These lessons are not merely historical. They reflect the underlying patterns that govern human behavior, patterns visible in everyday life. Consider a business negotiation. A colleague offers a concession that seems generous on the surface. However, the action is motivated by the expectation of reciprocity or by the desire to establish credibility for future advantage. Understanding the self-interest behind such gestures allows one to respond strategically, recognizing that the apparent generosity is a signal, not a guarantee. Similarly, political leaders often make promises that appeal to the desires or fears of their supporters. Their actions are rarely altruistic. They are carefully calibrated to achieve a specific outcome. By observing the motivations behind these decisions, one begins to see patterns repeat across contexts, from corporate meetings to social gatherings. Even in personal relationships, this truth holds. A friend who supports you in one moment may seek approval, validation, or influence in return. A partner's actions may be shaped as much by fear of loss or desire for security as by affection. Recognizing these underlying motives does not require cynicism. It requires attentive observation and reflective interpretation. The skill lies in noticing consistency between actions and underlying needs, and using that insight to navigate interactions thoughtfully. Historical examples reinforce this principle further. Leaders who anticipated the self-interest of rivals often succeeded where others failed. Julius Caesar, for instance, built alliances by understanding the ambitions of his contemporaries, rewarding loyalty while neutralizing threats. Sun Tzu emphasized knowing both your own motives and those of others to secure victory. In each case, success depended not on assuming virtue or logic, but on observing patterns of self-interest and responding accordingly. For the viewer, these examples provide validation and inspiration. The abstract principle becomes tangible. Human behavior is not chaotic, and opportunities emerge for those who see the underlying rules. Curiosity deepens as one begins to connect historical insight with personal experience. Every interaction, whether professional, social, or familial, becomes a laboratory for understanding motives and predicting outcomes. By applying this lens, the audience can make decisions with greater clarity, anticipate challenges, and cultivate influence without deception or force. Ultimately, the point is simple. Patterns of self-interest are universal. From leaders shaping nations to friends negotiating favors, the principle remains constant. Observing these patterns trains the mind to recognize opportunity, anticipate behavior, and act with informed strategy. For the attentive viewer, this understanding is empowering. The world becomes legible, interactions gain structure, and the path to effective action becomes far clearer than it appeared before. Beneath every human action lies a set of psychological forces that drive behavior: desire, fear, pride, and envy. These forces operate quietly, often without conscious awareness, yet they shape decisions, reactions, and interactions in profound ways. Understanding them allows us to predict behavior before it manifests, offering a clarity that most people never achieve. When we see these motivators at work, patterns emerge, transforming seemingly unpredictable behavior into something far more intelligible and manageable. Desire is perhaps the most obvious driver. It fuels ambition, creativity, and persistence, but it also creates vulnerability. People pursue what they want, sometimes at the expense of logic or morality, because fulfillment of desire carries intrinsic reward. A colleague may seek recognition not out of vanity alone, but because the affirmation satisfies a deeper sense of worth. A partner may push for attention or commitment not merely from affection, but from the security that desire provides. Recognizing desire allows us to understand what motivates action and where influence can be most effective. Fear operates in parallel, often in subtler ways. Fear of loss, of embarrassment, or of failure shapes decisions as strongly as desire. People hesitate, avoid confrontation, or act defensively, and these behaviors are predictable once the underlying fears are acknowledged. In leadership, fear influences compliance and loyalty. In everyday interactions, it governs silence, acquiescence, or exaggerated displays of competence. Observing the patterns created by fear equips the viewer to anticipate reactions, respond calmly, and navigate situations strategically without surprise. Pride and envy are equally powerful. Pride drives people to protect their image, assert status, and seek validation. Envy fuels comparison, competition, and subtle manipulation. Both forces can create conflict or cooperation depending on circumstances. A person may boast or exaggerate to maintain perceived superiority, while quietly resenting someone else's advantage. Understanding these dynamics allows one to interpret behavior beyond superficial appearances, recognizing that even seemingly irrational actions often follow internal logic. The combination of these psychological mechanisms creates a predictable framework for human behavior. Machiavelli recognized centuries ago that success in leadership depended not on assuming virtue or fairness, but on anticipating how desire, fear, pride, and envy would guide action. Modern psychology reinforces this insight, showing that these motivators are universally present and remarkably consistent across contexts. Whether in personal relationships, professional settings, or social interactions, the patterns repeat themselves. For the viewer, this section provides both insight and quiet empowerment. By recognizing these forces, people stop surprising us. They behave as expected, allowing the audience to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. Attention sharpens, curiosity persists, and engagement deepens, as each interaction becomes an opportunity to observe, analyze, and predict behavior. The social world shifts from chaotic to intelligible, offering a rare form of clarity and strategic advantage that few possess. Ultimately, the lesson is clear. Every action has a hidden driver. Desire, fear, pride, and envy are not abstract concepts. They are the engines of human behavior. Observing them transforms perception, equipping the viewer with understanding, foresight, and a reflective calm that allows for both engagement and mastery of social dynamics. Deception is woven into the fabric of human interaction. It is rarely malicious. More often, it is a natural response to the social world. People conceal motives, exaggerate strengths, downplay weaknesses, and manipulate perception to achieve personal advantage. These behaviors are subtle, almost invisible to those who take appearances at face value. Yet they shape outcomes in profound ways. Recognizing patterns of deception and understanding how to see beyond them gives the perceptive observer a strategic edge, transforming social navigation from guesswork into deliberate insight. Consider a casual encounter where someone appears entirely candid. A smile, a confident tone, a friendly gesture. On the surface, everything seems genuine. But underneath, motivations may differ. Perhaps they aim to gain influence, secure favor, or test the reactions of others. Every word and action carries dual meanings: the message presented and the underlying intent. The observer who attunes to subtle cues, hesitation, shifts in tone, contradictions between words and gestures, begins to see the hidden layer beneath the surface. Deception is not always explicit. Often, it is the absence of truth rather than the presence of falsehood. Even in professional settings, deception is commonplace. Leaders may overstate confidence to inspire trust. Colleagues may mask ambition to avoid conflict, and friends may downplay envy to maintain harmony. Each behavior is a calculated performance, guided by self-interest and fear. Recognizing these patterns allows the viewer to anticipate behavior rather than react impulsively. It is not about cynicism or distrust, but about understanding the social scripts that people unconsciously follow. By seeing through these scripts, one gains clarity, predictability, and influence. Masks are also present in more personal contexts. People hide vulnerability, mask uncertainty, or perform emotional displays to shape perception. Romantic partners, family members, and friends often act in ways that protect their image or satisfy hidden desires. The perceptive observer notices these subtle performances, discerning the distinction between what is presented and what is real. Each interaction becomes a study in human behavior, revealing motives that were otherwise invisible. Learning to see through masks is the foundation of social mastery. It allows for informed decisions, strategic responses, and a measured approach to relationships and influence. The perceptive individual can anticipate actions, avoid manipulation, and subtly guide outcomes without coercion. Deception is not eliminated. It is understood and incorporated into a framework of awareness. The social world becomes less intimidating, more navigable, and more intellectually engaging. For the viewer, this section cultivates intrigue and cautious empowerment. Curiosity is sustained by the challenge of discerning hidden motives, while engagement remains high as practical applications emerge. Each insight builds confidence, reinforcing the sense that social dynamics are understandable and controllable. By seeing beyond appearances, the audience gains the ability to act with foresight, influence subtly, and navigate human interactions with calm, reflective intelligence. Emotions are the lens through which humans experience the world, but they can also be a veil that obscures truth. Anger intensifies perception, often exaggerating threats and distorting judgment. Desire narrows focus, making us blind to risks and alternative outcomes. Hope can create illusions, convincing us that reality aligns with our wishes rather than facts. These forces, while natural and unavoidable, frequently cloud understanding and lead to decisions that serve emotional impulses rather than rational insight. Recognizing this is the first step towards seeing situations clearly, without being controlled by feelings. Consider a heated disagreement. Anger magnifies grievances, inflates minor offenses, and prompts reactive behavior. A moment of frustration can cascade into a series of poor choices, each justified by emotion rather than reason. Conversely, desire can lead people to overcommit, to misjudge intentions, or to overlook warning signs. Hope may cause repeated miscalculations, keeping someone invested in outcomes that are improbable. These distortions are not failures of character. They are predictable consequences of unexamined emotions, recurring in every relationship, workplace, and social dynamic. Detachment does not mean indifference. Rather, it is the ability to observe without being immediately swept away by emotional currents. The mind that observes without attachment gains an unparalleled advantage. By stepping back, by examining actions and motives objectively, the viewer can interpret behavior accurately, anticipate outcomes, and act with intentionality. This practice cultivates calm, reflection, and clarity, creating space for strategic thinking even in emotionally charged situations. Practical application of emotional detachment is visible in leadership, negotiation, and personal relationships. A leader who remains composed in the face of provocation maintains authority and sees the true dynamics at play. A negotiator who resists frustration can identify hidden motives, leverage opportunities, and guide interactions toward optimal outcomes. In everyday life, detachment allows the audience to navigate conflicts, understand intentions, and respond in ways that balance empathy with strategic awareness. Emotional clarity becomes a tool for both perception and action. The reflective tone of this approach reinforces a philosophical mindset. Observing without attachment is not a temporary tactic, but a habit of thought. It encourages the audience to see beyond immediate impressions, to consider the hidden forces shaping behavior, and to recognize the subtle patterns that govern human interaction. This perspective fosters both mental calm and intellectual engagement, sustaining attention while deepening understanding. For the viewer, the section cultivates relaxation alongside empowerment. By lifting the veil of emotion, they gain a sense of mastery over perception. The world becomes less overwhelming, interactions more comprehensible, and social dynamics more predictable. In learning to detach, the audience acquires a skill that enhances insight, reduces impulsivity, and allows engagement with life in a thoughtful, deliberate, and strategically aware manner. Understanding human nature is powerful, but knowledge alone is incomplete without application. Once we recognize that people act from self-interest, are guided by desire, fear, pride, and envy, and often conceal their true intentions, we gain a framework for action. Life, both personal and professional, becomes a landscape to navigate deliberately, rather than a series of unpredictable events. Strategic application turns insight into advantage, allowing the perceptive individual to influence outcomes, negotiate effectively, and avoid unnecessary pitfalls. Consider negotiation, whether in business, friendship, or family. Those who understand human motives recognize the levers that drive decisions. A request framed to appeal to desire or alleviate fear is far more effective than one grounded purely in logic or fairness. Similarly, knowing what someone values, status, approval, security, allows one to craft interactions that align with their interests, increasing the likelihood of cooperation without force or manipulation. Influence arises naturally when actions anticipate needs and desires rather than confronting them blindly. Strategic awareness also protects against manipulation. When we can read motives beneath appearances, we are less likely to be surprised by deception, flattery, or empty promises. A clear understanding of self-interest allows the viewer to assess situations accurately, distinguishing between genuine collaboration and calculated performance. This discernment prevents wasted effort and guides the individual toward productive alliances while avoiding unnecessary conflict or betrayal. In everyday life, applying these insights requires calm observation and deliberate action. In social gatherings, one notices how people cluster, who seeks attention, and who retreats quietly. In professional contexts, it is possible to identify power dynamics, anticipate moves, and respond in ways that preserve advantage. The ability to act with foresight comes not from manipulation but from careful assessment, seeing opportunities, predicting outcomes, and positioning oneself effectively. Every choice becomes informed by understanding, every interaction an opportunity to navigate with strategic clarity. The philosophical underpinning of this approach is critical. Strategy is not exploitation, it is alignment with reality. The world is not ruled by morality or fairness, but by consistent patterns of human behavior. Recognizing these patterns allows one to respond intelligently, avoiding reactive impulsivity while maintaining agency. Life becomes less a series of surprises and more a domain where careful observation, reflection, and application create opportunity and control. For the viewer, this section inspires both empowerment and responsibility. Curiosity deepens as abstract insight transforms into practical guidance. By applying knowledge deliberately, the audience experiences a shift from passive observation to active engagement, feeling capable of influencing outcomes rather than being subjected to chance or others' whims. Life becomes a game with discernible rules, one that can be played intelligently, patiently, and effectively. Strategic awareness, cultivated through observation and reflection, becomes a tool for navigating the social world with confidence and calm mastery. Influence is an art, subtle and often invisible. It is not about coercion or manipulation, but about understanding the currents that shape human behavior and gently steering them toward desired outcomes. Those who grasp the hidden forces of self-interest, fear, desire, pride, and envy can guide interactions with precision. Small adjustments, framing words carefully, choosing the right moment, observing responses, can produce significant results, turning ordinary encounters into opportunities for strategic advantage. Influence, when practiced with awareness and ethics, becomes a natural extension of understanding human nature. Framing is one of the simplest yet most powerful techniques. How information is presented affects perception and decision-making. A request or idea framed to align with someone's interests or values is far more persuasive than one that appeals solely to logic. For instance, emphasizing the benefits a person will gain rather than the effort required can transform resistance into cooperation. Similarly, framing outcomes in terms of loss or risk can leverage the natural fear of disadvantage, prompting decisions that serve both parties. Timing is equally crucial. Even the most compelling insight loses impact if delivered too soon or too late. Observing emotional states, energy levels, and context allows one to choose the moment when influence will be most effective. A thoughtful pause before presenting an idea, a quiet approach during heightened tension, or a carefully timed compliment can create receptivity where a rushed or poorly timed approach would provoke resistance. Patience and attention to rhythm are key elements of strategic influence. Observation underpins both framing and timing. By carefully attending to behavior, words, and subtle cues, the perceptive individual deciphers what motivates others, what they value, and where their vulnerabilities lie. Influence emerges not from force, but from alignment with these underlying dynamics. Observing patterns in advance enables action that feels natural, even inevitable, to those involved, producing outcomes that benefit all parties without overt pressure or conflict. Ethical application of these techniques requires reflection and awareness. Influence is most effective when it serves mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Understanding motives allows one to navigate human behavior responsibly, guiding interactions toward outcomes that satisfy both self-interest and the interests of others. The perceptive observer balances strategic advantage with empathy, ensuring that influence is exercised with integrity, not manipulation. For the viewer, this section transforms abstract insight into practical skill. Engagement remains high because the audience sees concrete ways to implement what they have learned, whether in professional negotiations, social interactions, or personal relationships. Confidence grows as they realize that understanding human behavior provides subtle but powerful leverage. Small, thoughtful adjustments, framing, timing, observation, become tools for navigating life with calm strategy and refined influence, demonstrating that mastery of human nature is both an intellectual and practical pursuit. In the realm of human behavior, patience is often more powerful than action. Many make the mistake of rushing to judgment or responding impulsively, believing that speed equates to advantage. Yet, true mastery lies in observing quietly, understanding fully, and acting deliberately when the moment aligns with both insight and opportunity. Rushing reveals ignorance. Observing patiently reveals mastery. By cultivating patience, the perceptive individual gains clarity, foresight, and the ability to shape outcomes with subtle precision. Observation, paired with patience, allows the viewer to see patterns unfold naturally. Human behavior rarely reveals itself instantly. People test boundaries, signal intentions indirectly, and adjust based on the responses they receive. Acting too quickly often results in misreading these signals, leading to unintended consequences. In contrast, strategic waiting permits the mind to collect information, recognize trends, and anticipate actions. The moments of quiet observation are as valuable as the moments of decisive intervention, creating a rhythm between insight and action. Consider negotiation or leadership. A hasty response may escalate conflict or squander leverage. Waiting, listening, and interpreting the motives of others builds a reservoir of understanding. The perceptive individual recognizes not only the immediate desires of others, but also their long-term patterns of behavior. Timing becomes a tool, allowing interventions that feel natural and inevitable rather than forced. The advantage is not in domination, but in clarity, achieved by aligning actions with both knowledge and opportunity. Patience also strengthens emotional control. The impulses of anger, frustration, or desire often push people toward impulsive decisions. By observing quietly and refraining from immediate reaction, the perceptive individual maintains calm, seeing interactions as they truly are rather than through the fog of emotion. This composure reinforces credibility, authority, and influence, as others unconsciously respond to the steadiness of the observer. Calm patience becomes a signal of competence, subtly guiding perception without overt effort. The philosophical dimension of strategic waiting cannot be overlooked. Life, interactions, and influence are long games. Rushing to act may provide temporary satisfaction, but thoughtful timing creates sustainable advantage. The perceptive individual cultivates foresight, understanding that some opportunities emerge only after careful observation and reflection. By integrating patience with insight, the audience can approach social dynamics with measured confidence, anticipating reactions and navigating complexity with calm authority. For the viewer, this section encourages reflection and deliberate engagement. The pacing allows mental relaxation while maintaining intellectual curiosity. By appreciating the value of patience, they internalize a strategic mindset, one in which observation precedes action and understanding outweighs impulsivity. In mastering the rhythm of quiet attentiveness, the audience prepares to apply all prior insights, moving toward a deeper comprehension of human nature and the philosophical principles that guide influence, behavior, and personal strategy. Understanding human nature is not merely an intellectual exercise. It is a transformation of perspective. Once we recognize that people act from self-interest, are guided by desire, fear, pride, and envy, and often conceal intentions behind appearances, the world itself begins to shift. Life becomes more predictable, interactions less threatening, and decisions more deliberate. Knowledge of these patterns provides a lens through which both ourselves and others can be understood, creating clarity that leads to both intellectual and emotional freedom. Reflecting on our own behavior, we see the influence of these same forces within ourselves. Desire drives ambitions, fear shapes hesitation, pride governs perception, and envy colors judgments. Awareness of these internal patterns allows for self-mastery. Rather than reacting unconsciously, we learn to pause, observe, and choose responses aligned with intention rather than impulse. This reflective stance transforms the way we engage with the world, fostering a calm, measured approach to relationships, work, and decision-making. The philosophical insight is profound. Understanding human nature begins within as much as it begins with others. The insights gleaned from observing others are equally transformative. By recognizing the signals people send, the subtle performances they enact, and the underlying drives that guide behavior, the perceptive individual navigates interactions with foresight. Deception loses its power, impulsive reactions diminish, and influence arises naturally through alignment with reality rather than through force. The audience begins to see life not as chaos, but as a structured domain governed by consistent, intelligible patterns. This understanding empowers thoughtful action, strategic engagement, and measured responses, all rooted in awareness rather than control. Machiavelli's lessons resonate here. Power and influence emerge not from moral idealism, but from observation, understanding, and application. Nietzsche's reflection deepens this perspective. The clarity that comes from seeing human drives liberates the individual from the illusions of morality, expectation, or societal pretense. Mastery of human nature is therefore both strategic and philosophical. It is the art of seeing clearly and acting with insight, without being enslaved by external appearances or internal impulses. For the viewer, this section fosters both reflection and closure. Curiosity is satisfied as the overarching framework of human behavior comes into focus, while engagement remains high through the integration of insight with personal application. The audience feels empowered, not through domination, but through understanding, a calm, strategic awareness that transforms perception into clarity, observation into foresight, and knowledge into measured action. Ultimately, mastering human nature is not about control over others. It is about freedom of understanding, the ability to move through life with clarity, composure, and purpose. Every interaction, decision, and choice becomes intelligible, navigable, and meaningful. By internalizing these insights, the audience gains a lasting framework for strategic living, emotional calm, and philosophical reflection, leaving them equipped to engage with the world thoughtfully, decisively, and with enduring clarity. The journey of understanding human behavior culminates in balance, a synthesis of empathy, observation, and strategic insight. Knowledge of self-interest, desire, fear, pride, and envy equips the audience not merely to anticipate actions, but to engage with life thoughtfully and deliberately. True mastery is not about domination or manipulation. It is about moving through the world with clarity, foresight, and measured agency. When we see human nature clearly, we are no longer passive participants. We become strategists of life itself, able to act with awareness rather than being swept along by circumstance. Empathy remains essential in this framework. Understanding human motives does not require cold detachment from emotion. Rather, it involves recognizing the needs and fears of others while maintaining objectivity. This dual awareness allows the perceptive individual to respond in ways that are both considerate and strategically informed. By combining empathy with observation, the audience gains insight into both intention and consequence, creating a harmony between understanding and action that guides decisions with subtlety and wisdom. Observation, cultivated throughout this journey, is equally vital. The attentive mind notices patterns, reads signals, and discerns behavior beyond surface appearances. Subtle cues, hesitations, gestures, phrasing, reveal motives that words may conceal. Patience and careful study allow the observer to anticipate outcomes, align responses, and influence interactions without force or manipulation. Strategic insight emerges naturally from this clarity, enabling decisions that maximize advantage while maintaining integrity and respect. The philosophical dimension of this mastery lies in perspective. Life is governed by consistent patterns, yet it is not fully predictable. Embracing this paradox requires both humility and discernment. Understanding human nature frees the audience from illusions, naive optimism, or reactive impulses. It allows them to act with awareness, navigate challenges with composure, and respond to complexity with thoughtful deliberation. In every interaction, personal, professional, or societal, the perceptive individual moves with both clarity and confidence. For the viewer, the emotional impact of this conclusion is profound. A sense of calm arises from knowing that human behavior is legible and understandable. Empowerment comes from realizing that insight, reflection, and strategic awareness confer freedom, the ability to choose responses rather than being subject to unpredictability. Engagement peaks as the audience internalizes the philosophical message. Knowledge is not power alone, but the foundation for wise action, clarity, and independence. Ultimately, this section leaves the audience with enduring insight. The world may remain unchanged, but one's understanding of it transforms the experience of life itself. By combining empathy, observation, and strategy, viewers gain the ability to act thoughtfully, anticipate behavior, and navigate social dynamics with both intellect and composure. The intellectual journey concludes not with domination or cynicism, but with a sense of philosophical completion, emotional balance, and lasting clarity. Life, once opaque and chaotic, becomes navigable, meaningful, and strategically aligned with awareness, reflection, and calm mastery.